It's my great pleasure to welcome to the UK, on behalf of BBC Sky Night magazine, Mr. Scott Kelly. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And you're here in the UK because you're promoting your book,
Mhm.
which is about your year in space. How
Mostly.
how are you enjoying your time in the UK so far?
It's good. We're pretty busy. We're getting a really good reception, though. A lot of people interested in the book and coming out to these book events, and they've been fun, asking great questions.
Um, Now, you landed from your year in space in March 2016. That's
Yeah.
correct. Do you still feel any residual effects of your year in space, or is it all pretty much gone?
I don't feel anything physically. I have some structural changes in my eyes that I would imagine are still there. Certainly, there might be some radiation effects, but nothing that I can feel.
Yeah. What were the both the best and the hardest things about coming back to Earth?
Well, the best thing is you have, family and friends that you miss. You have everything that Earth has to offer, which is, with the exception of really interesting work in space, a great view, and floating around, which is fun. There's a lot more stuff on Earth, so you get to look forward to and appreciate that. But I would say the hardest part about coming back, especially after being in space for so long, is the physical effects. That was different than I experienced on my previous mission.
Yeah, because it's a really extreme environment on the ISS. I mean, not only have you got kind of, seem to be from the book anyway, constant threat of something going wrong, but also very, very noisy, and even in terms of the way your blood
Yeah.
flows, it affects the way you feel.
It's there are definitely some hardships associated with it. I mean, it's an incredible experience. It's a privilege, but at the same time, you're living in zero gravity, which causes the blood to redistribute itself in your body. That kind of gets better over time, but it never completely goes away. There's other effects that microgravity has, like on your digestive system, things like that, take a while to adjust to. Floating makes everything really hard to do, with a couple of exceptions, which is like moving things that are heavy and putting your body in some awkward positions. You're in this enclosed environment. You can't leave. You're always at work. So yeah, there's some hardships to it. I think it is, not for everyone, but definitely something that I was privileged to experience a number of times.
There's a fantastic section of the book where you describe one of your spacewalks, and because it's dark, you can't tell whether the Earth is above you or below you. I mean, can you describe that for us? Because there's a really, really interesting passage from the book.
Yeah, getting lost in space is pretty exciting and a little nerve-wracking, maybe. But I had to do this task in this part of the space station that I really wasn't all that familiar with. It was kind of in a different area. It was dark. I went back there, and when it's dark, you have helmet lights on, but you can only see what is right in front of you. It's really hard to get any big picture kind of orientation of where you are in the space station. And without gravity, it's really easy to get. Gravity helps us know which way is up and down, and you don't have that. So sometimes when you get turned around upside down and it's dark, it's kind of hard to figure out where you are. And to help myself, I actually went back to where my tether was connected. We have these long safety tethers. And I thought that would help me reorient myself. But then when I get there, I realized, well, I didn't put my tether there. My spacewalking buddy did. So I wasn't really all that familiar with the whole area. And I'm looking at this blackness above me, and I'm thinking, well, that's probably space, because with the lights, you can't really see the stars. With the helmet lights in darkness, I think it's space. And then eventually I see these lights of the Persian Gulf, like Abu Dhabi, Dubai, against the darkness of the Arabian Gulf there. And then I realized, okay, where I am, and got reoriented and was able to finish my work.
I mean, I guess the reason you were able to kind of do that is, there's another point that you make in the book, is that because you see so many orbits, you're actually an expert on kind of pointing on seeing different land masses and being able to pinpoint where they are on the Earth. Did the novelty ever wear off?
Um, Well, it's I would imagine people that have very expensive, beautiful paintings in their house. Every once in a while they might take one down and put it away for a while and then bring it back out. Maybe it's a little bit like that. That you always appreciate the view. You feel privileged to have it, but when you see it every day, it becomes something you're very familiar with. Never take it for granted. You do recognize certain parts of the area very, very well. In fact, I kind of felt like after being there for a year, I was pretty good at just looking out the window and knowing exactly where I was. So much so that during the end of the flight, I opened the window cover, the cupola, and I saw this spot of sand that had a certain texture and color to it. And I knew immediately we were right over this little desert north of Mogadishu in Somalia. And I thought, man, I've been up here for a long time.
One of the other interesting things that really caught me when I was reading the book is just how much of a collaborative effort it is between the Russians and Americans. I mean, obviously, there's so many nations involved in it, but specifically given the kind of context of the space race and the Cold War and things like that, it's really incredible to have these two nations coming together.
Yeah, it's amazing that we're able to do this partnership of, the hardest thing we've ever done in space, risky environment. Two countries that have historically been enemies or sometimes, close to it, don't always get along. But in space, something that is important to us, this peaceful environment, we can work together for the benefit of both of our nations. It's a great example of what we can do if we put our minds to it.
It must be quite frustrating actually being on the ISS and kind of looking down and not seeing any borders and not seeing any countries, just seeing one planet, and then to then switch on CNN and see what's actually happening down there.
I wouldn't call it frustrating, but I would say it's more, kind of hard to understand. We have this beautiful planet. It's unique in the universe as far as we know. It provides us everything we need to live. And it seems like, in a lot of ways, we take it for granted. We don't realize how lucky we are. And I think, it's almost like you have to go to space to really appreciate Earth.
Yeah, exactly, because there's even things that you mentioned, like jumping into a swimming pool felt amazing because you hadn't done it in a year. This just must be the smallest things that we take for granted every day that you kind of...
Yeah, so, after being in space, I really appreciate, running water. Clean water. The water we have in the space station is clean, it's fine to drink, but having the ability to, wash your hands with water, we don't have that. And you know what? There are people on Earth that don't have that either, and that's not right. I think that's kind of a human right. Everyone should have the right to have, clean running water. That's not the case. And you don't really realize that until you've lived without it for a year.
Just also to come back to the kind of Russian-American collaboration, you were doing your year in space with Mikhail Kornienko, who you refer to as Misha in the. I kind of find he almost kind of comes across as a character in the book because he keeps cropping up. I mean, all the other astronauts come and go in the Soyuz because their missions are much shorter. But we've always got Misha, and he's the kind of... we almost kind of grow an affection for him, I think, as the reader. And
good, because that's the kind of guy he is.
Yeah. And there's a fantastic bit where you're both just about to get into the Soyuz and leave, when Misha turns around and he pats the space station goodbye, like he's kind of... because he knows it's the last time he'll see it, I guess.
Yeah, almost like it's kind of a thing, like a living thing.
Yeah.
And he's just saying goodbye, like maybe it's like you would pat a dog or something.
Did you kind of feel that attached to the space station? Do you still kind of miss it?
Absolutely, and but not as attached. He's a very earthy kind of person, Whenever we'd be on Earth around grass, we'd take his shoes off and walk barefoot in the grass, and that is just so Misha to, pat the space station before he leaves.
Yeah.
I definitely have a fondness for it. But Misha's kind of a maybe even more emotional guy.
I mean, do you miss the space station to the extent that you would go back?
I'd go back in a second.
One of the other interesting things, American astronauts have to basically go through all the Russian traditions and culture when they're preparing to lift off. I found that absolutely fascinating. I mean, some of the traditions and things I guess are maybe at odds with what you might expect, but it's things like having to get out to pee on the wheel of the car.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, Yuri Gagarin, when he was on the way to the launch pad, the first human to fly in space, he had to relieve himself, and they stopped the bus. He peed on the tire, opened up his spacesuit, peed on the tire, got back in the bus, got in the rocket, launched, safely returned to Earth. So why wouldn't everyone else do that?
Just
it
as
worked for him. I was told yesterday that apparently the guy that bolted the hatch closed for Yuri Gagarin is the same guy doing it today. When the Russians, when they've been great partners. I made a joke a little bit about them occasionally, but they're definitely a culture of if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Definitely. I mean, you also make the point in the book that the people who patched together the parachutes for the Soyuz capsule on the return journey, it's the same factory, the same people who were doing it decades ago.
Yeah, they definitely have an aging workforce. Clearly, I mean, you go through the factory and the different their different facilities. They got some very senior people working there. They're gonna have to bring in some, and I think they are bringing in some younger folks.
Yeah, it almost kind of does it make you think that when U.S. astronauts eventually stop using the Soyuz to get into space, to get to the ISS, do you think future U.S. astronauts will miss something in terms of not experiencing that Russian culture tradition?
So the current plan is once we start flying SpaceX and a Boeing CST-100 to the space station for access to low Earth orbit for the near future to the International Space Station from U.S. soil with American and ESA and our other international partner astronauts on board. The plan is to also have a Russian on a U.S. spacecraft and an American astronaut on a Russian spacecraft. The idea being, if one of these rockets has an issue, we're prepared to still have our people on the space station. So we'll continue to have Americans flying the Soyuz, just not as many.
Mm-hmm. I also kind of wanted to come back to your kind of upbringing and your early education, because the first few chapters of the book you kind of make the point that you weren't really paying attention in school and kind of falling behind in your grades. What was it that kind of gave you the drive?
Yeah. So I couldn't pay attention. It's not that I didn't want to. I showed up at school the first day of school every year thinking, okay, time to get straight A's. 2 days later, I was back to my old habits of not being able to pay attention. I think if I was in school today, I'd be the kid with ADD or ADHD, and I spent more time looking out the window or looking at the clock, trying to will it to run faster than I ever did paying attention in class. And it wasn't until I got to college, and I just happened to be, walking across the college campus. I went into the bookstore, not to buy a book, to buy like gum or something. And I saw a book on the shelf, had a red, white, and blue cover, had a really cool title. It made me, not this book, but it made me pick it up. I read the back. I was like, wow, this is interesting. I paged through it, took my gum money, bought the book, went back to my dorm room, laid there for the next few days, and read Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff. And the way Tom Wolfe wrote, perhaps, really spoke to me, really made me believe that I could be like the guys that he wrote about. I felt like I had a connection to them, with one exception. I couldn't do my homework. So I thought, if I could fix that problem, maybe I could fly airplanes in the Navy or be a test pilot, maybe even be an astronaut someday. And, that book was my inspiration. That I think if I didn't see that book that day, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. I was 18 years old that day. Fast forward 18 years later, and somehow I was the first American in my class of 35 astronauts to fly in space. I hadn't really even thought about that much, really at all, over the years until I wrote this book. So, it's not only a book about living on the space station for a year, it's a book about endurance in other ways. I had many, many opportunities to fail. I wasn't always the best at something when I started it. What I learned is, how good you are when you start something is absolutely no reflection on how good you can become if you work hard, never give up, have a little bit of endurance, so to speak.
Yeah, because the everything that you went through, I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. From all the studying and exams that it took to flying fighter pilots and landing them on aircraft carriers, I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. I mean, and it's all detailed so well in the book. I mean, when you were on the ISS, were you taking notes? I was just always amazed at how much detail you were able to recall.
So, the stories that I tell before I was on the space station for a year, a lot of them are stories that I've kind of told over the years. Because as an astronaut, and I mean over the years, I really mean over the years as an astronaut, because you get interviewed, people ask you questions about your life, your previous life, how'd you get involved. So, some of the stories are have a lot of detail because I'm not recalling them right now. It's something I've been talking about since like 1996 when I got selected. The ones in space for a year, however, were I kept a journal. The journal was mostly in the first half because I think what people find is when they're trying to write a journal every day, eventually they get kind of bored with it. It wasn't exactly that. What I found was after about 6 months, I had documented all the stuff that kind of applied through the whole year. The living in space, the working in space, what does it smell like, what does it look like, what does it sound like, what's a normal day like, and then the events that change or the people that came and left were something I would occasionally take little notes from, but I wasn't as dedicated a journalist as I was in the beginning.
Now, one of the other things that made your year in space such a breakthrough is that you're the twin study with your brother Mark. So I was wondering if you could explain a bit about what that is and maybe whether or not there have been any kind of results or what sort of thing they were studying.
So after I got assigned to this flight, they were getting ready to announce who the crew was, and I was the crew member, the U.S. crew member. Misha was the Russian guy, and we were getting briefed on the science program so we could answer questions in a press conference. And during the briefing, getting us ready for the press conference, I happened to ask a question of, hey, do you guys have any interest in any kind of genetic studies with my brother and I? Because, we're identical twins, and, you've had data on him since 1995 when we first started interviewing for this. So a lot of, background data, baseline data, I think you might call it. And the scientist said, no. But if we weren't interested, would you be interested? And I said, if it made sense, if this experiment made sense, sure, I think my brother would be too. And they said, okay. So he goes back to his office and talked to his colleagues, and then they talked to a bunch of people out in academia and research institutions, universities, and there was a lot of interest. And the reason I learned later that this never came up was because it's against the law for the U.S. government to ask their employees to participate in genetic research. This is a kind of a new area. They haven't quite figured out how to do this yet, and my brother and I were never even allowed to be asked. But when I asked the question, it kind of opened the door a little bit. So they came up with all these different experiments. Some were kind of mental, psychological, cognitive stuff. The majority of the other things were more like sample-based, DNA-based, and some of the results we've heard about. Some of them it'll take a while. generally NASA science, when you're not kind of competing to publish with somebody, when you're like the one person doing the experiment, they kind of take their time. They want to do it right. Generally takes 3 to 5 years from data collection to publication. But there have been some publications. One is very interesting, is that my telomeres, which are these ends of your chromosomes, that the quality and length of them are an indication of your physical age. So as we age, they get shorter, more frayed. The hypothesis was that me being in space, getting a lot of radiation, living in a stressful environment, maybe other factors they don't understand. The thought was my telomeres would go in the direction of aging compared to my brothers on Earth. What they found was the exact opposite. Mine got better, his kind of tracked along on where they were supposed to, and then when I got home, mine kind of went back to normal. So when you have an experiment, a hypothesis, and the results are the exact opposite, it's a pretty cool experiment. And hopefully we'll learn something from it. It's not going to be the fountain of youth, I don't think, but it is a result that we currently know. My genes, not these pants, but the genes inside of me, were turning on and off at a very rapid rate when I was in space, much differently than on Earth. And that's something they had never looked at before. They don't understand it. A gene turning on could be a good thing or a bad thing. Gene turning off could be good or bad. They don't know which. All they know is that was happening very, very quickly throughout the time in space, and even when I got back for a little bit, and then eventually it kind of went back to normal.
Absolutely incredible, and obviously part of the reason that for the year in space and for tests like these is because we eventually want to travel farther into space, farther than the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I've heard, you're an advocate of attempting a journey to Mars.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
As long as there's a one-way, as long as it's not a one-way trip, I'd want a return ticket.
Why do you think we should, or
Why should we go to Mars?
yeah?
I think there are a lot of reasons. One is that species that can stop growing and expanding and developing kind of cease to exist, along with civilization. So, not necessarily now, but someday, we're going to have some of our planet, some of the people, move off the planet. And Mars is the perfect place. It's, at one point it was similar to Earth. It had an oxygen atmosphere, liquid water, oceans, so it seems like an ideal place. Venus would not be a good place because of the atmospheric pressure and the sulfuric acid rain clouds. The moon, on one hand, it's close, but it has no atmosphere, no real resources that, at least like in the quantity that Mars does. So it seems like Mars is a logical place. So I think, for exploration purposes, for continuing to expand and grow our civilization, someday going to Mars, I think is going to be necessary. So, and we should go as soon as we can. And when we do those things, the hardest things, we develop technologies that benefit us on Earth. So I think there are several reasons. Plus, if you discounted all of that, and you said, I don't believe any of that stuff you just said, the motivational factor for our children to get involved in science, math, engineering that the space program provides is, I think, worth every penny. When you have kids around the world that, because of NASA and ESA and Roscosmos, can say, I want to be an astronaut and a cosmonaut, I'm going to be a good science student, good math student, because I want to work for those organizations someday, that has a significant societal benefit to us. That motivation factor alone, I think, is worth the cost.
You said it yourself, the ISS is probably the hardest thing humans have ever done, and we did it together, so there's no reason why we couldn't do other things together. And just on that subject, one of my favorite parts of the book actually is when you're describing coming back in the Soyuz. That's an absolute roller coaster. It must have been, well, for someone who's trained, it probably wasn't terrifying, but
I've heard that people that were trained have screamed that they thought they were going to die. I didn't scream, but I do say, once you realize you're not going to die, the most fun you've ever had in your life.
And when you landed, you in the Soyuz, you wanted to, you were sure you could walk away from the
Oh, I
landing,
could have walked, yeah.
but you weren't
Not
allowed.
well. They don't let you. I think they're worried you're going to fall over.
Will you be sad when the ISS eventually, because the ISS will eventually deorbit into the Pacific
Yeah.
Ocean?
You know, I'll be nostalgic about it. I would be sad if they did it, got rid of it too soon. But when it's at the end of its life, I'll look at it as, hey, that was a great achievement. And I'm going to be there to watch it. Absolutely. Even if I have to row out there in my own rowboat, I'll watch it come back into the atmosphere.
So now that you're retired from NASA, what are your projects? What are your goals for the future? Are you taking it easy, or have you got more things to accomplish?
You know, I've been busier since I got back than I ever have been in my life. You know, I wrote this book, which was not easy. It took me about 20 months. Wrote a kid's book called My Journey to the Stars. I do a lot of public speaking. I'm on the boards of a few companies. But, you know, this book tour is kind of winding down. I got some other books I'm working on, but it's not going to be as much work as this was. So I think in the new year, I'll probably have to start thinking about something else to challenge myself.
Yeah, I mean we're approaching Christmas, obviously, and Christmas must have been an exciting time. Well, was Christmas an exciting time in the ISS, or was it just another day?
No, it's exciting. You know, the Russians celebrate Christmas on January 7th, I think. So it wasn't like the whole space station had a holiday. Usually, you know, New Year's Eve it's an international holiday for everyone. But I've been in space for Christmas 3 times. My first flight, shuttle mission, only shuttle to ever be in space over Christmas, and then twice on the International Space Station. And, you know, on one hand, you feel like you miss your family, especially when your kids are young. But on the other hand, you feel like, wow, I have such a privilege to be flying in space, period. And what an incredible place to spend Christmas. And I will always have, you know, memories of Christmas in space. If I had not spent Christmas in space in 1999, there is no way I would be able to tell you anything about what my Christmas was like in 1999. I wouldn't remember.
Why?
Because it was so long ago.
Oh,
What did you do Christmas in 1999?
I see what you mean. I can't
Yeah, give me
remember.
some. Yeah, you can't remember.
So-
I can remember most about it.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously just was a year that you'll remember for the rest of life. Are there any other kind of particular memories that stand out? I love the idea of you looking up and seeing Samantha Christopher Reddy running on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I got a lot of stuff in here like that. And I tried to make this book a book that someone could read and feel like they were there. And maybe I got a little bit of that from Tom Wolfe, you know, that creative nonfiction where you try to, you know, use your imagination a little bit to put the person in the moment, you know, try to make them smell and see and feel and hear what it's like so they can maybe believe that they were along for the ride a little bit with me.
I think you definitely achieved that. It was a fantastic book to read. I really, really enjoyed it, and really felt like I was there. Almost felt a bit of nostalgia, even though I wasn't actually there. I could kind of feel the nostalgia that you were feeling. But yeah, it's a fantastic book, and it's a great account of an incredible year.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for coming today to talk to us about it, Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very
I
much.
appreciate it. Thanks.